My wife went to spend Christmas with my daughter in Canada. On the second day, I got a call for help. When I arrived, I found my wife freezing outside while my daughter and son-in-law laughed inside. I kicked the door open, and what I said left them pale. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought Christmas could feel so empty. At 60, I'd grown used to quieter holidays, but this year felt different. Martha had flown to Canada 3 days ago to spend Christmas with our daughter, Chloe, and her husband. I'd stayed behind. Someone had to watch the house, and honestly, I wasn't thrilled about spending the holidays with my son-in-law anyway. The house felt too big without Martha's humming in the kitchen or her gentle complaints about the thermostat being too low. I'd been looking forward to her daily check-in calls, but yesterday's call had been brief. She sounded tired, maybe a little strained, but I chalked it up to travel exhaustion and the chaos of being around the grandkids. I was sitting in my recliner, nursing my second cup of coffee, and watching some mindless morning show, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Martha's number, and I smiled, expecting to hear about the kids' excitement over their Christmas presents. "Morning, sweetheart," I answered, settling back into my chair. But the voice that came through wasn't the Martha I knew. It was barely a whisper, shaky and desperate. George, please." I sat up straight, my coffee mug hitting the side table with a sharp clink. "Martha, what's wrong?" I need help." Her voice was so quiet I had to press the phone harder against my ear. "I'm so cold, George. I'm so cold and I don't know what to do." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean you're cold? Where are you? Are you sick?" I can't get back inside." Her voice broke, and I could hear her trying to stifle a sob. "They won't let me back inside." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Who won't let you inside?" "Martha, where are you exactly?" "I'm outside the house. I've been out here for—" Her voice trailed off, and I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow. "Outside?" "Martha, it's December in Canada." "How long have you been outside?" "I don't know, maybe an hour, maybe more." "George, I'm scared." I was already moving, heading toward the bedroom to grab clothes. "I'm calling Chloe right now. This has to be some kind of mistake." "No!" Her voice was suddenly urgent, almost panicked. "No, don't call her. Please don't call her. Just, can you come? Can you please just come?" I stopped in my tracks. In 35 years of marriage, Martha had never sounded like this. Not when her mother died, not during her cancer scare 5 years ago, not ever. This was terror in her voice, pure and simple. "Martha, you're scaring me. What happened? Did you and Chloe have a fight?" I questioned something. I asked about how they talked to the children, and her voice got even quieter. And things got bad very quickly. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Bad how? Martha, talk to me." "I can't feel my fingers anymore, George. I can't feel my fingers, and they're laughing inside. I can see them through the window, and they're laughing." The phone started to slip from my hands. "They're laughing? While you're outside in the cold?" "I have to go. I think I hear someone coming." "George, please." The line went dead. I stood there in my bedroom, staring at my phone like it might suddenly make sense of what I'd just heard. My wife, my Martha, who wouldn't hurt a fly, was locked outside in Canadian winter weather, while our daughter and son-in-law laughed inside a warm house. I immediately tried calling back. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I called Chloe's number, my hands shaking as I dialed. It rang 4 times before Chloe answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, Dad. Merry Christmas." "Chloe, where's your mother?" "Oh, Mom's fine. She's just taking a little walk, getting some fresh air." The casualness in her voice made my blood run cold. "A walk? Chloe, it's below freezing there." "Well, you know, Mom." She needed to cool down after our little disagreement. There was something in Chloe's voice I'd never heard before. Something that sounded almost amused. What disagreement? And why isn't she answering her phone? "Dad, you're being dramatic. Mom will be fine. She just needs to learn that she can't come into our house and start criticizing how we raise our children." I felt the world tilt slightly. "Criticizing? Chloe, your mother called me in tears saying she's been locked outside for over an hour." "Locked outside?" Chloe laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "That's so typical of Mom being dramatic. The door isn't locked. She can come in any time she wants to apologize. Apologize for what? For overstepping, for thinking she knows better than us about our own children. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. This wasn't the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared, or the teenager who called me crying when boys broke her heart. Chloe, I'm booking a flight right now. Dad, that's ridiculous. This will all blow over by tomorrow. No, it won't. And if anything happens to your mother while she's out there, anything at all, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. I hung up before she could respond and immediately opened my laptop to search for flights. The earliest I could get to Toronto was tomorrow morning, with a connection that would put me there by noon. As I booked the ticket, my hands were trembling, not from age, not from the cold house, but from something I'd never felt toward my own child before. Fear. Fear of what she'd become, and fear of what I might find when I got there. I tried calling Martha 15 more times that day. Every call went straight to voicemail. The flight to Toronto felt like the longest 6 hours of my life. I'd barely slept the night before, calling Martha's phone every hour on the hour until finally giving up around 3 a.m. Each call went straight to voicemail, and each unanswered ring felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I'd tried calling Chloe twice more, but after the second call, where she insisted everything was fine and that I was overreacting, I stopped. There was something in her voice that I didn't recognize, something cold and dismissive that made me feel like I was talking to a stranger wearing my daughter's face. The rental car GPS led me through suburban Toronto streets lined with perfect houses and snow-covered lawns. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated how picturesque it all looked. Today, all I could think about was Martha somewhere in this cold, possibly hurt, possibly worse. Chloe's house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured front yard and expensive cars in the driveway. I'd helped pay for this house, I realized with a bitter taste in my mouth. I'd been so proud when Chloe told me they were buying it, so happy that my little girl was living the American dream, even if it was the Canadian version. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. The house looked normal, peaceful even. Warm yellow light glowed from the windows, and I could see the flicker of what might be a television screen through the front window. I got out of the car and immediately felt the bite of the cold air. It had to be below zero, with a wind that cut right through my jacket. The thought of Martha being out in this weather for any length of time made my stomach clench. I walked up to the front door and was about to knock when I heard something that stopped me cold. Laughter. Bright, carefree laughter coming from inside the house. And then I heard a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. A soft tapping, like someone knocking, but barely audible. I followed the sound around the side of the house, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And there, pressed against the side wall near a small window, was Martha. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She was hunched over, her arms wrapped around herself, wearing nothing but the light sweater and slacks she'd probably worn to travel. Her lips were blue, her face was pale, and she was shivering so violently I could see it from 10 feet away. "Martha!" I called out, running toward her. She looked up, and the relief in her eyes was so profound it nearly brought me to my knees. "George," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You came." I reached her and immediately wrapped my arms around her. She was so cold she felt like ice, and when I touched her hands they were stiff and barely responsive. "My God, Martha, how long have you been out here?" "Since yesterday afternoon," she said through chattering teeth. "I tried to get warm by the window, but—" She gestured weakly toward the house. I looked through the window she'd been near, and what I saw made my vision go red around the edges. It was the living room, and Chloe was sitting on the couch with her husband, both of them laughing at something on TV. My grandchildren were playing on the floor nearby, completely oblivious to their grandmother freezing just outside the window. The worst part was that I could tell they knew she was there. Every so often, one of them would glance toward the window with what looked like amusement. Not concern, not worry, amusement. "They know you're out here," I said, my voice coming out lower and more dangerous than I'd ever heard it. Martha nodded weakly. I knocked on the door this morning. Chloe answered and said I could come in when I was ready to stop being difficult. Difficult? The word came out like a growl. I asked them to stop yelling at the children. That's all, George. The baby was crying, and instead of comforting him, they were screaming at him to shut up. When I said something, they told me it wasn't my business how they raised their kids. I looked at my wife, this woman who had never raised her voice to our own daughter, who had spent countless hours reading bedtime stories and bandaging scraped knees and teaching Chloe how to be kind. And my daughter had left her outside in freezing weather for the crime of protecting children. When I wouldn't apologize for caring about my grandchildren, Martha continued, her voice getting weaker, they told me I could think about my attitude outside. I felt something inside me snap, not break but snap into place, like a bone setting after being broken. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Martha, honey, I'm going to get you inside and warmed up. But first, I need you to stay right here for just one more minute. Aha, she nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes at the thought of me leaving her alone again. I walked to the front door and tried the handle. Locked. I knocked hard enough to rattle the door in its frame. Chloe opened it after a minute, and her face cycled through surprise, annoyance, and then a practiced smile. Dad, you actually came. That's so sweet, but really unnecessary. Where's your mother? I told you, she's outside. She can come in whenever she wants to stop being stubborn. I looked past her into the warm house, at my son-in-law who was still watching TV as if nothing was happening, at my grandchildren who deserved better than parents who would leave an elderly woman outside in winter weather. Chloe, I said, my voice deadly calm, I'm going to give you exactly 10 seconds to step aside so I can help your mother, and then you and I are going to have a conversation about what kind of person you've become. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not remorse, not shame, but something that might have been uncertainty. Dad, you're being ridiculous. Mom is fine. She's just being... I pushed past her into the house and walked straight to the back door. It was locked, too, with a deadbolt that required a key from the inside. They had deliberately locked her out. This wasn't about her stepping outside to cool down. They had trapped her outside in potentially lethal weather conditions. I unlocked the door and went to get Martha, supporting her as she stumbled into the warm house. She was shaking so badly she could barely walk. Behind me, I heard Chloe say to her husband, "Can you believe this drama?" That's when I knew that whatever happened next, our family would never be the same. I helped Martha to the living room couch, wrapping her in the first blanket I could find. Her hands were still shaking, and I could see the beginnings of what looked like frostbite on her fingertips. 36 hours. My wife had been outside in below freezing weather for 36 hours. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said, examining her pale face and blue-tinged lips. "I'm okay," Martha whispered, though we both knew she wasn't. "I just need to warm up." Chloe was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not concern, not guilt. Something closer to irritation, like we were interrupting her day. "Dad, you're making this into such a big deal," she said, her voice carrying that same casual tone that had chilled me on the phone. "Mom's fine. She's being dramatic." I looked up at my daughter, really looked at her. When had her eyes become so cold? When had this hardness crept into her voice? This was the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, who used to cry when she accidentally stepped on ants. Dramatic? I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 60 years in my joints, but also feeling something else, a clarity I hadn't experienced in a long time. "Your mother has been outside for a day and a half in freezing weather. Her lips are blue, her hands aren't working properly, and you think she's being dramatic?" "She could have come inside any time she wanted," Chloe's husband called from his spot on the couch, not even bothering to look away from the TV. All she had to do was apologize. I walked over to where he was sitting, and something in my movement must have gotten his attention because he finally looked up at me. Apologize for what exactly? He shrugged, a gesture so casual and dismissive it made my hands clench into fists. "For criticizing our parenting, for thinking she knows better than us about our own kids. What did she say that was so terrible it deserved this punishment?" Chloe stepped closer, her voice getting sharper. She accused us of being bad parents, Dad. She said we were too harsh with the children. I looked over at my grandchildren. The youngest, barely 2 years old, was sitting quietly in the corner, unnaturally still for a toddler. The older one, 5, was playing with blocks, but kept glancing nervously at his parents. Both children had that careful, walking on eggshells demeanor I recognized from my work with troubled families. "What exactly did you say to upset them so much?" I asked Martha gently. Martha's voice was still weak, but there was a strength in it now that she was warming up. Tommy was crying because he was hungry. Instead of feeding him, they were screaming at him to shut up. When he kept crying, your son-in-law grabbed him and shook him. I felt the blood drain from my face. He shook the baby. I stepped in and said, "You can't shake a baby like that, it's dangerous." That's when they told me I was overstepping and needed to mind my own business. Chloe's husband stood up now, his face flushing red. That kid never stops crying. He needs to learn that crying doesn't get him what he wants. "He's 2 years old," I said, my voice getting dangerously quiet. "He cries because that's how 2-year-olds communicate, and you never, ever shake a baby." "Don't tell us how to raise our kids," Chloe snapped. "You and Mom had your chance with me. These are our children." I stared at my daughter, and for the first time in her life, I saw her clearly. Not as the little girl I remembered, not as the young woman I'd been proud of, but as the person she had actually become. And what I saw made me sick to my stomach. "So let me understand this," I said slowly. "Your mother tried to protect your children from being physically shaken and verbally abused, and your response was to lock her outside in weather that could have killed her." "We didn't lock her outside," Chloe said, but there was something in her voice now that sounded almost defensive. "The door wasn't locked. I tried the front door when I got here. It was locked. I tried the back door. It was locked with a deadbolt that needs a key from the inside." Chloe's husband shifted uncomfortably. "We might have forgotten we locked it." "For 36 hours? You forgot for 36 hours? Martha spoke up from the couch, her voice stronger now. "I knocked on the door yesterday evening when it started getting dark." Chloe answered and said I could come in when I learned some respect. "Respect?" I turned back to my daughter. "What kind of respect involves leaving a 62-year-old woman outside in winter weather?" "The kind that teaches people not to interfere where they don't belong," Chloe said, and there was something vicious in her voice now. "Mom has always been too involved, always thinking she knows better. Maybe this will teach her some boundaries." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just cruelty or thoughtlessness. This was calculated. This was punishment. "How long has this been going on?" I asked Martha. She looked down at her hands. "This visit? Since the day I arrived? They've been different, angry all the time. The children are afraid to make noise, afraid to ask for things." "No, I mean, how long have they been treating you like this?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. "Remember when I came back from my last visit and I was so tired? I said it was the travel, but what? But they made me sleep on the couch because I disagreed with them about bedtimes. They said their house, their rules, and if I didn't like it, I could find somewhere else to sleep. I felt the world tilt again. That was 6 months ago. You've been dealing with this for 6 months and didn't tell me? I thought if I just tried harder, if I was more careful about what I said, maybe they'd let me see the grandchildren without all the drama." Behind me, I heard Chloe snort with what sounded like amusement. "She's so desperate to be the perfect grandmother, she'll put up with anything." That's when I turned around and really looked at my daughter, not with the eyes of a loving father, but with the eyes of someone seeing clearly for the first time. "You enjoyed it," I said quietly. "You enjoyed watching her suffer." Chloe's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked almost like a smirk. "I enjoyed watching her learn that she can't just waltz in here and take over. She's your mother. She's a guest in my house, and guests follow the rules or they leave." I looked around the room one more time. At my wife, still shivering despite the blankets. At my grandchildren, sitting too quietly, too carefully. At my daughter and her husband, who seemed to think what they'd done was not just acceptable, but justified. "Pack your things, Martha," I said quietly. "We're leaving." "Dad, don't be ridiculous," Chloe said. But for the first time, there was something uncertain in her voice. I walked over to where she was standing and looked down at her. She was my daughter, my little girl, but she was also someone who had nearly killed her own mother out of spite. "You want to know what I think is ridiculous?" I said, my voice so quiet that everyone in the room had to strain to hear it. "I think it's ridiculous that I raised a daughter who could do this to someone who loves her unconditionally." Okay? And then I said something that I knew would change everything between us forever. Something that made both Chloe and her husband go pale with understanding of just how far they had pushed things. "I know what you've been doing with the money I've been sending you," I said quietly, watching as both Chloe and her husband went completely still. "And I know about the drugs." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense that something important was happening, because they stopped playing and looked up at us with wide, frightened eyes. Chloe's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, defiance, and then something that looked almost like relief, as if she was tired of hiding. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The money I've been sending for the children's activities, for their school supplies, for their clothes, none of it went to the children, did it?" Martha looked up at me from the couch, confusion clear on her face. "What money?" I kept my eyes on Chloe as I answered. "For the past 2 years, I've been sending them $500 a month." Chloe told me they were struggling, that the kids needed things, that her husband's job wasn't enough to cover the expenses. "We were struggling," Chloe's husband said defensively, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I did some checking on the flight here, called your mortgage company, your credit card companies. You haven't made a mortgage payment in 4 months. Your cards are maxed out. But it's not because you don't have money coming in." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, showing them the screen. 2 years of $500 a month, $12,000, plus the extra $1,500 I sent for Tommy's medical bills that you said insurance didn't cover, plus the $3,000 for the car repairs you needed last spring. Martha was staring at me now, her mouth slightly open. "George, what are you talking about? What medical bills? What car repairs?" "There were no medical bills," I said, still looking at Chloe. "Tommy never had any medical problems, and they didn't need car repairs. I found out what they really needed the money for when I called your neighbor." The neighbor had been more than happy to talk to me. Apparently, there had been several complaints about loud parties at all hours, people coming and going at strange times, and what looked like drug deals happening in the driveway. "Mrs. Patterson was very concerned about the children," I continued. "She said she's called child services twice because she was worried about what was happening in this house." Chloe's husband jumped up from the couch. "That old bitch needs to mind her own business." "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice made him actually take a step back. "Mrs. Patterson also told me about the time she found Tommy wandering in her backyard at 2 in the morning while you two were passed out inside." Martha gasped, her hand going to her throat. "Tommy was outside alone?" "It was one time," Chloe said quickly. "We had the flu, we were sleeping heavily." "You were high," I cut her off. "Both of you." Mrs. Patterson said Tommy was in his pajamas crying, saying he couldn't wake up Mommy and Daddy. I looked around the room again, seeing it with new eyes. The expensive television, the gaming system, the designer furniture, all of it purchased with money they'd told me was for their children's needs. "The drugs started small, didn't they?" I said to Chloe's husband. "Probably just marijuana at first, then prescription pills. Now it's cocaine, isn't it?" His face went white. "How did you—" "Because I'm not stupid, and because Mrs. Patterson described the people she's seen coming and going from this house. She gave me license plate numbers. I ran them." This was partially true. I had talked to Mrs. Patterson, and she had given me concerning information. The rest I was inferring from what I'd observed: the paranoia, the aggression, the complete lack of empathy they'd shown toward Martha. "You've been using our grandchildren as leverage to get money for drugs," I said to Chloe. "Every time I sent money for the kids, you were really asking me to fund your addiction." Martha struggled to stand up from the couch. "Chloe, please tell me this isn't true." For a moment, my daughter looked like the little girl I remembered. Her face crumpled, and I thought she might break down and confess everything. But then her expression hardened again. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," she said. "You don't understand what it's like trying to raise kids with no help, no support. No help? Martha's voice was getting stronger, and there was anger in it now. I've watched those children every time you asked. I've cleaned your house, done your laundry, cooked your meals. What more help did you want? You're always judging us, Chloe shot back. Always making us feel like we're not good enough parents, like we're doing everything wrong. Because you are doing everything wrong. The words came out louder than I intended, and both grandchildren started crying. I took a deep breath and lowered my voice. Look at them, Chloe. Look at your children. The 5-year-old was trying to comfort his little brother, patting his back and whispering, "It's okay," in a voice that sounded far too mature for his age. These children had learned to take care of each other because their parents couldn't be counted on. This is what your drug use has done, I said quietly. Your children are raising themselves. We're not addicts, Chloe's husband said, but his voice was shaky now. We party sometimes. Everyone needs to blow off steam. You party with money meant for your children's food and clothes while your mother-in-law sleeps outside in freezing weather. Does that sound like reasonable behavior to you? Martha had moved over to where the children were sitting, and they immediately gravitated toward her, seeking the comfort their parents had failed to provide. Watching her with them, seeing how naturally they turned to her for safety, made everything even clearer. The children know, don't they? I said. They know something's wrong with Mommy and Daddy. Chloe looked at her children clinging to Martha, and for a split second, I saw something like shame flash across her face. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by defiance. There's nothing wrong with us that wouldn't be fixed if everyone would just leave us alone and let us parent our own children. Parenting involves actually taking care of your children, I said, not using them as emotional blackmail to get drug money from grandparents. I walked over to where Martha was sitting with the grandchildren and knelt down beside them. Hey guys, I said gently, would you like to come stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while? The 5-year-old looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. Will Mommy and Daddy be okay if we go? The question broke my heart. This little boy was worried about parents who had shown him nothing but instability and anger. Mommy and Daddy need some time to work on some grown-up problems, I said carefully, but Grandma and Grandpa would love to have you visit for a while. Behind me, Chloe exploded. You can't take our children. You have no right. I stood up and turned to face her. I have every right to protect these children from parents who are more interested in getting high than keeping them safe. We'll call the police, her husband threatened. Please do, I said calmly. I'd love to explain to them why my wife was locked outside for 36 hours while you were inside with 2 small children. I'd also love to discuss the drug paraphernalia I'm sure they'd find if they searched this house. Both Chloe and her husband went very quiet at that. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice carrying a finality that surprised even me. Martha and I are taking the children home with us. You two are going to get clean, get jobs, and prove that you can be responsible parents. And if we don't? Chloe asked, though her voice was barely a whisper. I looked at my daughter, this stranger who had once been my little girl, and felt something break inside my chest. Then you'll never see any of us again. The silence that followed my ultimatum stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could see Chloe's mind working, calculating, trying to find an angle that would let her maintain control of the situation. You can't just take our children, she said finally. But there was something desperate in her voice now. They need their parents. I looked at the 2 little boys, still clinging to Martha. Tommy had stopped crying and was sucking his thumb, something Martha had told me he'd outgrown months ago. The 5-year-old, Michael, was watching the adults with the kind of hyper-vigilant attention that children develop when their world becomes unpredictable. Do they? I asked quietly. Because from what I've seen, they've been taking care of themselves. Martha stood up slowly, still wrapping her arms around the children. George, she said softly, maybe we should talk about this privately. I knew what she was doing. Even after everything that had happened, even after being left outside to potentially die, she was still trying to protect Chloe from the consequences of her choices. It was who Martha was. She'd rather suffer herself than see someone else hurt, even someone who had hurt her. No, I said firmly. We're done talking privately. We're done pretending this is normal. We're done enabling this behavior. Chloe's husband suddenly sprang into action, moving toward the children. Come here, boys. You're not going anywhere with them." But something remarkable happened. Both children instinctively moved away from him and closer to Martha. Michael even put his little body between his father and his grandmother, as if protecting her. "They're afraid of you," I said, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. Your own children are afraid of you. "They're not afraid," Chloe said quickly. They're confused because everyone's arguing." But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she knew it wasn't true. These children had learned to be afraid, had learned that their parents were not safe sources of comfort. "Martha," I said gently, "take the boys to the kitchen and see if you can find them something to eat. They look hungry." Martha nodded and guided the children away from the living room. I heard her opening cabinets and then her sharp intake of breath. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway. "George," she said quietly, "there's no food here. The refrigerator is empty except for beer and leftover takeout that looks like it's been there for days." I felt my jaw clench. No food for the children? "There are some crackers in one cabinet, but that's it." I turned back to Chloe and her husband. "So not only are you spending the money I send on drugs, but you're not even feeding your children properly." "We feed them," Chloe said defensively. "We order pizza, we get takeout. 5-year-olds and 2-year-olds need regular meals, fruits, vegetables, milk, not just pizza when you remember to order it." Martha came back into the room, this time carrying Tommy while Michael held her hand. "I found some fruit snacks in my purse," she said. "But that's not a proper meal for growing children." I watched my grandchildren eating the fruit snacks like they were starving, and something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about the drugs or the cruelty to Martha or even the financial deception. This was about 2 innocent children who were being neglected and emotionally damaged by parents who cared more about their next high than their children's well-being. "I need to make some phone calls," I said, pulling out my phone. "Who are you calling?" Chloe asked, and there was panic in her voice now. "First, I'm calling Mrs. Patterson to see if she can give us more specific information about what she's witnessed. Then I'm calling Child Protective Services." Both Chloe and her husband went pale. "You wouldn't," Chloe whispered. "I absolutely would. In fact, I should have done it the moment I saw these children's living conditions." "Dad, please," Chloe said. And for the first time since I'd arrived, she sounded like my daughter again, scared, young, in over her head. "Please don't do this. We can work it out. We can fix this." I stopped dialing and looked at her. "How, Chloe? How are you going to fix this?" "We'll get clean. We'll stop using. We'll be better parents." "You've been telling yourself that for how long? Months? Years? Meanwhile, your children are living in a house with no food, watching their parents abuse their grandmother, learning that love comes with conditions and cruelty." Martha moved closer to me, the children still pressed against her sides. "Maybe," she said quietly, "maybe we could give them a chance. Maybe if they go to rehab, get some help." "No," I said firmly. "No more chances, no more maybes. These children deserve better than parents who might get clean someday." I looked at Chloe, really studied her face. The daughter I'd raised would never have let her children go hungry. The daughter I'd raised would never have locked her own mother outside in freezing weather. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger who happened to share DNA with my little girl. "You want to know the worst part?" I said to her. "It's not even the drugs. It's not the lies about money. It's that you enjoyed watching your mother suffer. You got pleasure from her pain." Chloe's face flushed red. "That's not true. I saw you through the window, Chloe. You and your husband laughing while she was outside freezing. That's not the action of someone who made a mistake or lost control. That's cruelty, pure and simple." Martha spoke up from beside me, her voice sad but firm. "She's right, Chloe. You did enjoy it. I could see it in your face when you told me I could come inside, when I learned respect. You liked having power over me." "You always acted like you were better than us," Chloe shot back. "Always perfect, always knowing the right thing to do. Maybe it felt good to see you brought down a peg." The honesty of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. This wasn't about drugs or money or even parenting. This was about resentment that had been building for years, resentment that had twisted my daughter into someone capable of genuine cruelty. "So this was all about hurting me?" Martha asked quietly. "This was about teaching you a lesson," Chloe said, but her voice was getting smaller now. as if she was finally hearing how her words sounded. I looked at my wife, at this woman who had given everything to raise our daughter with love and patience, who had never been anything but supportive and caring. And I looked at my daughter, who had turned that love into a weapon to use against the person who had given it. "The children are coming with us," I said finally, "tonight, right now." "You can't just take them," Chloe's husband said. But he sounded defeated now. "I can, and I will. You've proven that you're not capable of caring for them properly. They're not safe here, physically or emotionally." I knelt down in front of Michael and Tommy. "Boys, would you like to come home with Grandma and Grandpa? We have food at our house and warm beds, and tomorrow we can go to the park." Michael looked up at me with those two old eyes. "Will Mommy and Daddy come too?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer was going to hurt this little boy no matter how I phrased it. "Mommy and Daddy need to stay here and work on some problems," I said carefully. "But you and Tommy will be safe with us." "For how long?" Michael asked. I looked over at Chloe, giving her one last chance to step up, to fight for her children, to show some maternal instinct. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "Fine, take them. Maybe then you'll understand how hard it is to be a parent." And that's when I knew that the daughter I'd raised was truly gone. 6 months later, I stood in our kitchen watching Martha make pancakes while Michael helped by carefully measuring flour, and Tommy sat in his high chair, babbling happily and making a mess with his scrambled eggs. The morning light streaming through our windows illuminated a scene I'd never thought I'd experience at my age, raising young children again. The transition hadn't been easy. Those first few weeks, both boys would wake up screaming from nightmares. Michael would hoard food in his room, convinced it might disappear. Tommy would flinch whenever anyone raised their voice, even in laughter. Martha and I had to learn how to be parents again, but more than that, we had to learn how to heal children who had been damaged by the people who should have protected them. "Grandpa, look!" Michael held up his flour-covered hands proudly. I measured a whole cup. "That's perfect, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "You're getting to be quite the chef." The transformation in both children had been remarkable. Michael had started talking more, asking questions, acting like the curious 5-year-old he should have been all along. Tommy had begun sleeping through the night and had stopped that heartbreaking habit of flinching when adults moved too quickly around him. But the real transformation had been in Martha. She'd thrown herself into caring for the boys with the energy I hadn't seen in years. It was as if having them here had given her a purpose that went beyond the polite retirement activities we'd been filling our days with. "The social worker is coming this afternoon," Martha said quietly, as she flipped a pancake. I nodded. We'd been working with Child Protective Services for months, navigating the complex process of gaining custody of our grandchildren. The system wasn't designed for situations like ours, where grandparents had to step in to protect children from their own parents. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, too early for the social worker. "I'll get it," I said, walking toward the front door. Through the peephole, I saw Chloe standing on our porch. She looked thin, too thin, and there were dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to run to me when she was scared. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "Can we talk? Where's your husband?" "We separated 2 months ago. I'm in a program now, rehab. I'm clean." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but she seemed genuine. Still, I'd learned not to trust appearances when it came to my daughter. "How long have you been clean?" 47 days. She said it with the precision of someone counting each day as a victory. Behind me, I heard Martha's sharp intake of breath. She'd come to the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Chloe," Martha said quietly. "Mom?" Chloe's voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." Martha stepped closer, and I could see the war playing out on her face. The mother's instinct to forgive and comfort fighting against the hard-learned wisdom of someone who'd been deeply hurt. "Sorry isn't enough," I said firmly. "Sorry doesn't undo leaving your mother outside to freeze. Sorry doesn't undo months of neglecting your children." Chloe flinched as if I'd slapped her. I know sorry isn't enough, but I'm trying to make it right. I'm in therapy. I'm in the program. I'm working with a sponsor." For 47 days, I said. That's not very long. It's a start. Her voice was stronger now. I want to see my children. And from the kitchen, I heard Michael's voice calling for Martha. Grandma, my pancakes are ready. Chloe's face crumpled at the sound. They sound happy. They are happy, Martha said gently. They're safe and fed and loved. I know you're taking better care of them than I did. Chloe's admission was barely a whisper. I know they're better off with you. It was the first time she'd acknowledged that truth, and something in my chest loosened slightly. The social worker says I might be able to have supervised visits if I complete the program and stay clean for 6 months, Chloe continued. But I wanted to ask you first. I wanted to know if you think there's any chance I could earn the right to see them again. I looked at this woman who was my daughter, but also a stranger. The drugs were out of her system, but the real question was whether the cruelty I'd witnessed was gone too, or just dormant. You enjoyed hurting your mother, I said bluntly. That wasn't the drugs talking. That was you. Chloe's face went white, but she didn't deny it. You're right. I did enjoy it, and that scares me more than anything else about what I became. I'm working with a therapist about that specifically, about the anger I had toward Mom, toward you, toward everyone who seemed to have their life together when mine was falling apart. Martha stepped forward. What anger, sweetheart? We only ever tried to help you. I know, Chloe said, tears streaming down her face now. I know. And that made it worse. Every time you helped, it reminded me of how badly I was failing. Every time you were kind to me or the kids, it highlighted how cruel I was being. I started to resent your goodness because it made my badness so obvious. The honesty of that statement was stunning. This level of self-awareness was something the old Chloe never would have been capable of. The therapist says I turned you into the enemy because it was easier than admitting I was destroying my own life, Chloe continued. It was easier to blame you for making me feel bad than to actually change the things that were making me feel bad. I heard small footsteps behind me and turned to see Michael peeking around the corner. His face went pale when he saw his mother. Mommy? He said uncertainly. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Hi, baby. Michael looked up at me, seeking guidance. This little boy who had learned to be afraid of his own mother was now looking to me for protection. It's okay, I said gently. Mommy just came to talk to Grandpa and Grandma. Michael nodded but stayed close to my side. The distance between mother and child was heartbreaking, but it was also necessary. Trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with good intentions alone. I don't expect forgiveness, Chloe said, speaking to all of us now. I don't expect you to trust me. I just want the chance to prove that I can become someone worthy of being their mother again. It's not about what you want anymore, I said quietly. It's about what's best for them. And right now, what's best for them is stability, safety, and unconditional love. I know. Chloe wiped her eyes. But maybe someday, if I do the work, if I stay clean, if I prove I've changed, maybe someday they could have a mother who deserves them. I looked at Martha, who was crying silently. Then I looked at Michael, who was watching his mother with a mixture of longing and wariness that broke my heart. 6 months, I said finally. Stay clean for 6 months, complete your program, and we'll talk about supervised visits. But Chloe, if you relapse, if you lie to us, if you show even a hint of the cruelty you showed before, that door closes forever. She nodded eagerly. I understand. Thank you for giving me a chance. I'm not giving you a chance, I corrected her. I'm giving those children the chance to maybe have a mother someday. Don't confuse the two. After Chloe left, Martha and I stood in the doorway, watching her walk away. She looked back once, waving at Michael, who was now standing beside us. Do you think she can do it? Martha asked. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know those children deserve parents who will love them unconditionally. And if she can't be that person, then we will. Michael tugged on my shirt. Grandpa, is Mommy sick? I knelt down to his level. Yes, buddy. Mommy was sick for a while, but she's trying to get better. Like when I had the flu. Sort of like that, but it takes longer to get better. He nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. Grandpa? Yes? I like living here with you and Grandma. We like having you here too, buddy. And as I stood there with my arm around this little boy who called me Grandpa, With Martha beside me and Tommy chattering happily in his high chair, I realized something important. This wasn't the retirement Martha and I had planned. This wasn't the peaceful golden years we'd imagined. It was better. Because sometimes the family you save is your own.